Imagine this, your boss comes to you and asks for a clear and concise way to show progress towards your goals for the year. What comes to your mind immediately is probably to show a table of numbers with conditional formatting, or maybe a bar chart or even a pie chart. But you think to yourself that probably a bar chart is too plain or pie charts are overused, and you start wondering, is there a way that we can show this differently? So you do a quick search online, and in your research you find out that there is a different type of chart that you can use called a waffle chart. But the big question is, how do you make this type of chart in Power BI? In this video, I'll show you exactly that, a step-by-step guide on how you can create a waffle chart in Power BI. But first things first, what is a waffle chart? A waffle chart, by its definition, is a 10 by 10 grid of squares that contains numbers 1 all the way to 100. Each square represents a percentage achievement. In our example here, what we have is a list of projects, and we have been training farmers across the country within this project. So what we want to show is how many of the trained farmers were youth. So our waffle chart would essentially color, if you have achieved 15%, it will color the first 15 boxes, and then the rest of the boxes will be colored with a faint shade of the same color. So here I've gone ahead and created 3 measures that we shall be using for this report. So the first one is the total number of farmers that were trained. The second one is the total number of youth that were trained, which is basically the sum. And then the third one, which we shall be presenting in this example, is the percentage of youth, which is simply a division of the two. What we need to create now is the data that will drive the scatter plot for the 10 by 10 grid to make the waffle chart. So here in Power BI, from the Home tab, you can click Enter Data, as you can see here. Alternatively, you can also click the Transform Data button here, and that's what I want to click. This will open Power Query. So what you see here is simply the backend of the table that we connected to get the data. But what we want to do is to click the Enter Data from the Home tab here in Power Query and simply enter the x-axis values. So I'll rename this column to X rows, just to remember that this needs to go to the rows. Then I will type the numbers manually here. You can go ahead and do any other way, but you will type from number 1 all the way to number 10, like that. In terms of this name of the table here, we can call it Waffle Grid, okay? And just press OK. So that will simply give us 10 rows of data that we need for our x-axis. But remember, for every item that you have in the x-axis, you have 10 squares along the y-axis. That means for each of the numbers that you see here on screen, we are going to create a list of numbers from 1 to 10 that we can then expand to get 100 squares. So we'll create a new column here. From the Add Column tab, we'll click Custom Column. And the new column here, we shall call it Y Values. And here we use the syntax curly brace. Type your starting number, in this case it's 1, 2 dots, and then the last number that you need, and you close the curly braces, as you can see here. So this one will generate a sequence of numbers from 1 to 10 with a step of 1. So you can press OK. So what you will get is a list, as you can see here on the screen. Each row will contain a list, and as you can see down here, if I click on the side, not on the name list, but on the side down here, you'll see the numbers that appear for each row. Okay, so what we need here is to expand the list of Y values so that for every item of x-axis, we have 10 items or 10 rows. So what we'll need is to click these 2-sided arrows here next to the column header. When you click, you get 2 options, as you can see here. And the option that we need here is to expand to new rows because we need new rows for each. So if I click that one, you get the values. So every number that was in the x-axis or the x rows gets repeated as many times as we had the y values. So what we've just created right now is simply the x values and y values, but we need to see what is the intersection of each of the numbers. What number goes into the intersection of each? We need to add a new column. So I'll go to the Add Column tab, click Custom Column, and here you get this dialog box for you to type your formula. So I'll call it Current Grid Value. And this one, the logic is we need to get the x row values, the x-axis values. Then we add the y values less 1, and that subtraction needs to be multiplied by 10. So you can check the logic later. I need to put my brackets correctly here. So I need the subtraction to be in its own bracket as such. And that subtraction is what we are going ahead and multiplying by 10. Then we add the x value. So what you get here is the values that you need for the grid, the 10 by 10 square grid. So what you need to make sure is that these numbers are whole numbers. So we update the data type here by clicking the ABC123 and choose the option whole number. So we'll go ahead on the Home tab. I click Close and Apply. So you'll get a new table on the right side called Waffle Grid with all the values that we have created. So what we need now is to create a scatter chart that will present these numbers. So I'll go to the Insert tab where you have the list of visuals here. You can pick this one called the scatter chart. So when you click and it appears on the screen, let me just position it here. So next we need to apply the x values and the y values to this scatter plot. So let me just go to this build icon here. So I'll click Add Data and pick from here. This is the x rows value. I'll do the same with y-axis values. I open up the Waffle Grid and choose the y values. And this is what you just get, one dot presented. And the reason is because this default summarization of the two columns is a sum. As you can see here on the screen, it says sum of x rows, sum of y values. So basically what we need to do here is to disable that summarization. So I right click here on this sum of x rows and choose don't summarize. I do the same with the y values, right click and choose don't summarize. And this is what you get. It's getting closer. So next I'll go to the formatting elements. So with the formatting pane in place, what we're gonna do is to update a few of the properties, and one of them is the x-axis. We just go there and open that up. As you realize, the circles that you see here on this chart, the ones on the bottom layer, the ones on the rightmost layer and the topmost layer, they are sort of cut off. So what we need to do here is to update the minimum and the maximum. So we know our numbers are running from 1 to 10 in the x-axis, and similarly in the y-axis 1 to 10. So if I put a minimum of 1 here, you'll see that does not help because it's still cutting the circles. So we need to go down a little bit, maybe to 0 or 0.5. Let me go with 0.5. And then the maximum should be then 10.5. It just allows some more room for these values to be visible. It's not adding any value to the original numbers. So we'll do that, but we shall disable this option for values and the title for the axis. So we'll scroll down, open up y-axis and do a similar thing. So we do 0.5 for the minimum and then for the maximum 10.5 as such. So now you can see if we disable the values and the titles for the y-axis, all the circles are now visible, and this is the 10 by 10 grid we are talking about, but we are not yet done. So what we shall do next is to go down to where you find the markers. You open up the markers. Basically what we need to do here is to change the shape if you so wish, I prefer to go with a square like you can see here. If I choose that, you can see it updates on the chart. But you also have this option called size multiplier. So this one, there is nothing cast in stone. It's just you simply sliding this number to see how that looks on the chart. So I'll not have any multiplier on these icons. I'll just leave it at 0. So the next thing you may need to do here is to resize this scatter plot to maybe a smaller square in totality. So you can do that by going to the size and style properties and maybe set the height to 150 and the width to 150 as well. As you can see, you get a smaller grid as such. So the next thing that we need to do here is to apply a given color for the percentage achieved. In this case, if Narok Agro Pro Farms has achieved 47%, then we need to color 47 of the boxes in this scatter plot with a given color, and then the remaining boxes, 53 of them, shall be colored with the same color but a faint shade of the same. So in that case, we need a measure for that. I prefer doing a measure for the coloring, which is conditional formatting. So for the measure, I'll go ahead and right-click this table, Waffle Grid, and choose the option that says New Measure. Then on the formula bar, I will type the name of the measure to be Waffle Color. That will be equals to an if statement that checks how many of the 100 boxes are equivalent to the percentage achieved. So in this case, we shall be saying if the maximum of what? The maximum of the Waffle current grid value. So if I choose current, remember this is a list of numbers from 1 to 100. So if the maximum, and here you can use either minimum, maximum, or average, it simply doesn't matter because every square will have one value. So whether you do a maximum or mean or sum, it doesn't matter. So if the maximum value of that is less than or equals to the percentage achieved. So in this case, the percentage is the youth farmers trained. If that is the case, but remember, the youth percentage is simply a ratio from 0 to 1. So it's a decimal number. But the values that we have in our Waffle chart are numbers, whole numbers from 1 to 100. So we need to convert this percentage to a whole number equivalent. So what we need to do is to multiply the same number by 100. So after we multiply this by 100, so we need to go ahead and round this number away from 0 so it doesn't have decimals. Our Waffle values don't have decimals. So I'll introduce the round function here and say whatever you get after multiplying, round that towards 0 as such, and therefore it will round the numbers accordingly. So if the Waffle current value is less than or equals to the value that has been achieved for the youth farmers, put a comma. What color do we want to return? So here you can type green, for instance, and probably for the rest of the circles or the square grids, you can choose gray. So let's go ahead and see what that will give us. If I close the parentheses and press enter, so having created the measure, it's now time to apply that measure to update the color. Instead of the blue color that you see there, we can go ahead, open up the markers. You'll have this option for color. Go ahead. You can choose a straight color here for all the boxes, but what we want is to use conditional formatting. So I'll go ahead and click effects. And here you can change to rules, gradient, and field value. In our case, what applies the field value? In this case, we go ahead and look for this measure that we just created, Waffle color, and press OK. As you can see here on the screen, you have the first 47 boxes colored, okay? And the others which are not shaded green are the remaining part towards your goal. So I want us to update this color so that we don't have green and gray. So I'll go back to our measure and update this part that says green and use this hex code, which is basically a teal sort of a color. For the gray part, I will update also to a given hex code color, which will be basically the lighter version of the greenish or the teal color. If I press enter, you can see what you get here. So let's go ahead and disable the title here by turning it off on the formatting. So finally, you can also insert a card to display the number, which will be the percentage achieved or the number of youth farmers that were trained. So I'll go ahead and choose one of these cards. Let me go with this old card for illustration purposes. I'll place it next to this Waffle chart, and the measure that I'm gonna tick is this measure that says youth farmers percentage. So as you can see, you get this number here, and you could go ahead and apply the formatting just like before on this callout value. So the color here, you can go ahead and choose more colors and maybe type the same hex code that you used for the dark shades. So as you can see here, as we interact with this slicer here, the number on the chart will change. The shaded boxes will also change. And that's it. Now you know how you can create a Waffle chart in Power BI. I want you to try it out and let me know how it goes in the comments below. If you want more tips like this, make sure you smash that like button and the subscribe button. I've got plenty more coming your way. Meanwhile, check out this playlist here for even more cool visualization techniques.